One sunny morning, the unbearable screams of children echoed near the school. The students were bullying a girl, calling her a witch. They also thought she was contagious and were afraid to even accidentally touch her. Physical violence was part of it too, as they constantly pulled her hair and shoved her around. Afterward, they would run off to wash their hands, trying to scrub off the dirt they thought they might catch from her. The poor girl had to endure this treatment every day, and all she could do was cry. Then one day, she met another girl who was different from the rest, as she didn't join in the bullying. On the contrary, she stood up for her and promised to tell the teacher everything the next day. Moreover, she tried to befriend her, asking if everything was okay and how she felt. In that moment, the tearful girl believed in the existence of God and thought he had sent her a guardian angel with whom she would spend her life. But one day, a terrible tragedy struck as her savior didn't respond, and it was unclear what had really happened to her. Strangely enough, one missed call could change the fate of people forever. For right before her eyes, the girl witnessed the murder of her best friend, who had been her angel sent from heaven. This was a true shock for her. She tried to scream to the lifeless Mei, but it was already too late. At that moment, Qianxia didn't realize that this tragedy would change her life forever. From then on, her life became unbearable as she had to endure threats. These threats were directly related to Mei's death. They threatened her with violence and promised to end her life just like Mei's. She also faced constant gossip and whispers behind her back. Photos of her friend were sent in a group chat, and countless people mocked her. Moreover, they kept forwarding her pictures to each other, demanding payment for them. There was also a conspiracy against her, and real stalking began. All the events that unfolded in her life after her best friend's death drove her to a desperate step. Standing on the edge of a high-rise building, she was ready to jump to end her suffering. Just then, in her moment of greatest despair, he appeared. A demon who descended from the heavens. The boy was incredibly handsome, and he had come to save her. He wasn't an ordinary god, and as it turned out, the girl had been waiting for his arrival for a long time. Finally, Bai Jiho was able to hear her, and at that moment it was time to fulfill his promise. The scene shifted to the past, where a still-living Mei sat on top of a building. She was breathing heavily and was about to end her life. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Notifications kept coming from people who had seen her photos and were messaging her privately. It was especially hard for her to read and see how her life was falling apart. But she understood she was powerless to fix anything. She realized there was no way back. So, she planned to talk to Qianxia one last time and wanted to say goodbye. She didn't give up hope of reaching her, as she desperately wanted to hear her voice. But she couldn't even think that Qianxia might be in trouble. Unknown people had grabbed her on the street and accused her of flirting with their crush and even touching him. As proof, they showed her a photo of them together, but she had no idea who they were talking about. She stared at the photo for a long time, trying to figure out who that person was. And she wanted to remember what day it had happened. But it was just a regular customer at their bakery who had come to pick up his order. Qianxia felt that something terrible had happened to her friend and wanted to meet her as soon as possible. However, the girls wouldn't calm down and wouldn't let her go, despite her pleas. Suddenly, they lunged at her, trying to snatch her personal belongings and phone. But it fell out of her bag and shattered as it hit the ground. Meanwhile, Mei could only hear the buzzing and that the line was unavailable. This weighed heavily on her. She was utterly exhausted. Just then, Qianxia managed to escape and grab her phone. Putting it back together, she saw a bunch of missed calls from her friend and realized something terrible had happened. When she called her, she understood it was already too late. She begged for forgiveness for not being able to answer right away and tried to make things right. Qianxia ran, trying to save her friend. She didn't want her to go through the same horror and was convinced that everything that had happened to her would eventually pass. Suddenly, Mei hung up. She said that after her death, everything around would become easier. Qianxia almost reached the building but realized she was just a few minutes too late. She was the only person who could have saved her, but because of what had happened, she couldn't do anything. People around began to scream in horror at what they saw. Panic broke out in the city, and it was unclear how everything would end. Mei's mangled body lay in the middle of the street, and Qianxia witnessed the horror firsthand. That scene and her friend's death became the worst day of her life. She couldn't believe she was gone, that they would never be able to talk or spend time together again. She was the dearest person in her life, and she was the one with whom she shared all her secrets. Her legs gave way and she nearly lost consciousness. Qianxia couldn't understand why she had done this and was ready to do anything to turn back time. She blamed herself for her death and would never forgive herself for what had happened. After a while, the death scene was cordoned off with tape. The girl's body was taken away by an ambulance. It was so mangled that she was unrecognizable. The people who witnessed the tragedy couldn't believe that a young girl could do such a thing to herself. Qianxia couldn't come to terms with it for a long time. She didn't speak at all and couldn't eat anything for a while. Suddenly, she heard boys talking about the dead Mei behind her. As it turned out, they knew her and even went to the same school. Moreover, they had seen her photo and were sharing it in their group chat. They also exchanged photos with others, spreading them all over the city. The worst part was that even after her death, they continued to talk about her figure. The girl couldn't take it anymore and splashed hot tea in one of the boys' faces. In unbearable pain, he doubled over, trying to fight off the burns that appeared on his face. Qianxia stood before him, and the boy couldn't understand what had made her act like that. Suddenly, she saw the photos on his phone. It was a naked photo of her dead friend that they had been sharing among themselves. She couldn't bear it and lunged at the guy, snatching the phone from him. She tried to escape, but the boys caught up with her and shoved her. Qianxia found herself on the ground. The boys surrounded her and tried to take her phone. She attempted to delete all the photos in his gallery to destroy the ones of her friend. She kept doing it even though the boys called security and all tried to take her phone together. One by one, the photos disappeared from his gallery. But it was very difficult to do so under those circumstances. And she, enduring incredible pain, tried to finish it quickly. Eventually, after a while, she succeeded. She didn't care that security was about to arrive, or that the boys continued to hit her. She was just glad that she managed to do something. Still, she handed them the phone and the boys left her alone. An ambulance and police were even called to the scene. But fortunately, the victim didn't file a report and the girl was simply sent home, told not to do anything like that again. She returned home hungry and utterly exhausted. She felt broken and couldn't believe that her best friend was dead because of her. She saw no other options and was ready to do the same. So, at that very moment, she headed to the rooftop. She stopped at the edge. Looking down, she realized the height was immense and even after falling, she wouldn't have any chance of surviving. However, for the sake of her friend, she was ready to take that step and was determined to do the same. Qianxia blamed herself for not being able to save her as she could have fixed everything. At that moment, she turned to God. The girl prayed for him to hear her and help her. She was ready to sacrifice everything and pay the highest price in exchange for one of her wishes. Suddenly, she heard an unfamiliar voice and sound behind her. It scared her greatly, and when she turned around, she saw no one. But looking up, she saw a boy with wings above her. The girl couldn't believe her eyes as an unknown man who looked like a demon appeared before her. Her prayers had been heard and he had descended to fulfill her wish and try to help. It was by Jiho, a true urban legend, as his photo hung on many signs and posters. In that moment, she recalled a story from her childhood about a demon that her mother had told her. It was a story about lovers who could never marry. But they were expecting a child and it was about to be born. With the birth of their child, their most cherished dreams would come true as they had waited so long for it. However, at the very last moment, the worst happened. The girl didn't survive to see the world. Losing hope, they asked the gods for help and that same demon descended to them. He introduced himself as a demon who was ready to grant any wish for a high price. But in exchange for the birth of the child, he wanted something of equal value. The couple, who were heartbroken and suffering after the death of their baby, agreed to such terms. As a result, the girl managed to get pregnant again. They had a very beautiful baby. But they had to pay a very high price as a deal with the devil, as it was known, could lead to nothing good. For the demon took away their bond and they could never be together again. Moreover, anyone could encounter the demon. He sought out his victims, those who desperately wanted something and had lost hope in life. And her mother warned the girl that she should never ask him for any wish as she risked losing much more than she could gain. At that moment, the demon descended before the girl and she couldn't understand how he had managed to find her. There was no doubt that it was him. The very same evil spirit that she had been told about in her childhood. She also recognized that he was the same guy who had almost gotten her beaten up by the girls. But she was very lucky as the first time they had only warned her and let her go. She began to blame him for her friend's death. After all, it was because of that photo with him that she hadn't been able to respond and save her life. But the boy seemed very surprised and didn't understand what she was talking about. Qianxia, filled with anger, lunged at him and tried to hit him. But at the last moment, something unexpected happened. The demon raised his hand before her. This caused the girl to lift into the air and hover there for a moment. The boy insisted that he only wanted to grant her wish and that she had called him to her. He also knew what she truly wanted and who she wanted to take revenge on. At that moment, Qianxia realized that he knew everything about her and that she couldn't hide anything. After all, he was the very same evil spirit that everyone talked about. She tried to calm down, realizing that he wasn't involved in her friend's death and had no intention of harming her. Moreover, she had no chance of fighting him. Suddenly, Bai Jiho magically drew the girl closer to him. She was so close that she could feel his breath, which had become ragged. The devil knew she craved revenge and wanted to uncover the true reason behind her intense anger. She told him about her friend and how horribly she had been treated, leading to her breakdown and suicide. She was convinced she had to find everyone involved in spreading her friend's photo and punish them all. She begged the demon to grant her wish, but he warned her that it would come at a very high price. Bai Jiho replied that the girl had nothing to offer him but her body, which didn't interest him at all. Therefore, he couldn't make a deal with her since she had nothing to pay him with. He was about to leave her alone on the rooftop. But the poor girl tried to make him stay, as it was her only chance to make things right. She was ready to give him her own life. However, she held no value for Bai Jiho. He needed much more. But in his 100 years of existence, she was the first to be willing to raise a hand against him. This delighted him greatly despite the fact that nothing had come of it in Qianxia. So he turned back and announced that he was ready to grant her wish. After he touched her, everything in her vision began to fade and blur. She started to drift off to sleep. After a while, she lost consciousness. She found herself resting on the demon's chest. He held her, preventing her from falling onto the cold concrete. He was prepared to stay by her side and ensure nothing happened to her body. After all, when she woke up, her wish should be fulfilled. The next day, the heroine woke up in her own bed. However, she didn't understand how she got there and tried to recall everything. Suddenly, she remembered the demon and what she had seen the night before. But she began to doubt, thinking it must have been just a dream and that it hadn't really happened. After all, how could the famous demon Bai Jiho come to her? She tried to get out of bed, but felt terrible and hadn't slept at all. She also couldn't remember how she had fallen asleep or why she was still in her clothes. But when she looked at herself in the mirror, her eyes filled with fear. There was something strange on her neck. Upon closer inspection, she noticed a bite mark, resembling a vampire's. The girl began to remember what had actually happened to her and how it could have occurred. Her thoughts were interrupted by her phone ringing. Various notifications kept coming in, and she approached her phone to see who it was. It turned out to be alerts from the local news channel. They were reporting on the bankruptcy of a well-known company, and the news was simply unbelievable. The news also mentioned that thousands of people were left without jobs. Qianxia realized that the devil himself was likely behind this, and it could have happened because of her wish. After all, it was at that company where people had exchanged her friend's photos, leading to her tragic death. Suddenly, she heard a strange knocking behind her. It was coming from the window, and when she looked out, she saw the demon. Bai Jiho was in the body of an ordinary guy and had appeared to her just as she thought of him. He surveyed her apartment and concluded that it was too small. He also said that her wish had been granted as those involved in her friend's death had been punished and their lives were ruined. However, the girl was not satisfied, as many innocent people had also suffered and lost their jobs, making the consequences truly horrific. She wanted Bai Jiho to fix everything using his magic and return things to how they were before. But for her new wish, she would again have to pay a very high price. This time, Qianxia thought less about herself and only worried about the innocent people who needed to fix their situation and find work. So she agreed to any terms for the sake of others' well-being. At that moment, her wish was granted. Time began to rewind. All the events that had occurred in the world were sent back to the past. Day turned into night, and everything started from the moment it all began. The clocks showed a completely different time. The news broadcast on the TV changed to yesterday's program. And when she checked her phone, the girl realized that all her messages had disappeared and the date had changed. Qianxia couldn't believe that the demon was so powerful and could manipulate time so easily. But there was nothing in the world that was beyond his capabilities. Realizing this, the girl wondered if he could bring her friend back to life. However, the boy didn't respond. He knew he couldn't help her with that. Even demons had their own laws that couldn't be broken. But Bai Jiho felt how deeply the girl was disappointed when he refused her. He also sensed that she had already made a wish, because despite everything in the world, she wanted to bring her friend back to life and was willing to pay with her own. The main character worked at a well-known company. Her office was in the same building from which her friend had jumped to her death. Returning to work, all she heard was talk about the suicide and how an unknown girl had jumped from the roof. In reality, time had only rewound 18 hours since her death. And it was very sad to hear and understand that even in such a short time, many had managed to get used to her absence and come to terms with her death. After all, it was just a topic of conversation on the way to work for many, and in reality, no one gave it much thought. As it turned out, May worked in the finance department, and the heroine came to her workplace to collect her things. But she couldn't even do that, because the janitor had already thrown her belongings in the trash. This news was a real shock for Qianxia. She couldn't believe that people could be so cruel and why they had tried to get rid of her things so quickly. After all, the girl had worked at the company for 3 long years and had done her job well. She tried to blame the director for such brazen behavior, but he explained that no one wanted to come to work and look at the belongings of a dead person. Moreover, the man didn't want to take responsibility for such an act and blamed the janitors. He said they did it without his knowledge, and there was nothing he could change. The girl was already ready to leave when suddenly, an unknown woman stopped her. It was Han Xinqian, the head of the finance department where the deceased had worked. Her words and sudden appearance made Qianxia pause. The director tried to apologize for her subordinate's behavior and said he had expressed himself very poorly. It seemed even she found it hard to believe that the girl's things could just be thrown away. But as it turned out, she had managed to save some items and all of her belongings remained inside the room they entered. Upon entering, the heroine saw a huge number of her friend's personal belongings. This was the most precious discovery for her, because as she glanced inside the box, she couldn't hold back her tears. There were all of May's personal items and things she had loved dearly. Qianxia mourned as she went through her things. More than anything in the world, she wished her friend were alive and by her side. It hurt her deeply that she had left her so easily and left behind such a mess for her to sort through. She even felt angry with her for her actions, as she was convinced that there was a way out of any situation. The photograph she found was especially significant to her, and she wanted to take it home. Meanwhile, Bai Jiho, in the body of a boy who was a true city star, was getting ready for a fashion show and having makeup applied to his face. He was very calm, and his makeup artist asked what had him so preoccupied. But the boy had no desire to talk to her. He simply asked if she had a close friend and if she would be willing to die for him. He understood that the girl's wish was something incredible and very few people would be willing to sacrifice their own lives to save another. The demon realized she was quite extraordinary and it wouldn't be so simple with her. After all, the demon knew all about her life and remembered every moment from her childhood. He was aware of her early years and how she met her friend who stood up for her in school. He also remembered their entire friendship that had lasted since then and how they had bonded. It all started with an argument and the girls accused each other of being crybabies and cowards. Their friendship continued even in high school. And even as adults, they didn't forget each other and kept in touch. He also recalled an incident from her life, because that event had been a turning point in her life and had forever changed the girl's destinies. Qianxia had run into the road due to her own carelessness, and the driver of the car wouldn't have had time to react. If it hadn't been for May, Qianxia would have died that day, because she had risked her own life, running into the road and pushing her away. She herself ended up under the wheels of the car and suffered terrible injuries. And that horrific event had not only shattered her impressive sports career. The next few days at work were very tough for the main character. She couldn't gather her thoughts or concentrate on the tasks at hand. Her coworkers constantly made remarks to her, and the HR deputy noticed that something was off with her. Luo Xingnan knew she was very close to the deceased girl, and it was clear she was grieving deeply. In fact, he also missed her greatly and wondered about May's close relationships. His curiosity frightened the heroine, as no one knew about her relationship, and it was a big secret. She pretended to know nothing as her friend's boyfriend didn't want to make their relationship public and it was a secret. Suddenly, Luo Xingnan replied that May had confessed her feelings to him last year and he regretted that nothing had come of it. He blamed himself for not reciprocating her feelings. The boy tried to make amends for his behavior and guilt as he had genuinely liked her at that moment and didn't understand why he hadn't responded in kind. And when the heroine turned away from him, he tried to stop her. He wanted to continue talking about May, knowing she had no relatives and that the heroine had taken on all the funeral expenses, so he was ready to help. But he failed to impress Qianxia and she remained completely cold towards him. Returning to work, she heard the buzz of the crowd and that they had spotted the city star. The heroine realized they were talking about the same guy and couldn't believe it was just a coincidence. After all, Bai Jiho had arrived at their office and many employees had left their workstations to see him. One of the women pulled her to the window to see the handsome young man for herself. Many people were devoted fans and would do anything to meet him in person. Seeing him in person, they couldn't believe someone could be so good-looking. They marveled at his beautiful physique and how athletic he was. But the heroine understood that his appearance was not just a coincidence. At that moment, he was working on her wish and trying to fulfill it. Suddenly, the boy looked up and noticed her. Qianxia thought that at that moment he wanted to say something to her. But he just smiled and continued to look at her. The girl began to realize that she was the one who had conspired with the devil for revenge. The demon's human form was a superstar who looked very young and attractive despite being over 1,000 years old. After the deal, he had told her 3 rules she needed to follow. One of them was about his name, and whenever she thought of him, he would appear immediately. For any request or favor, she would have to pay a high price and give something in return. The last rule was the worst, as she had only 3 months left to live. Still, the girl realized she might have rushed to conclusions and began to regret making a deal with him. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to the elevator, which had stopped on her floor. It became clear that it was the boy, and his appearance immediately attracted the attention of all the employees. When the elevator doors opened, it was clear that it was him along with his bodyguard. The man next to him was very serious, and his job was to keep anyone from getting too close to the boy. Suddenly, the demon snapped his fingers. Time seemed to freeze, and everyone around the girl came to a standstill too. She was terrified, unable to believe her own eyes and the bizarre situation unfolding before her. Bai Jiho simply wanted her to come closer to him. With no other choice, the girl obeyed his command and moved toward him. The scene around her was far more horrifying than anything she had ever witnessed. She hoped that this time freeze wouldn't somehow affect her life. And nothing happened to the people who were affected, they remained unharmed. She wanted to convince the demon to take his time and hold off on making her complete her tasks because she needed to gather enough information about her friend's tormentors. Soon, she was planning to start her search. She already knew about a person who had been spreading photos, and he was the one who had managed to gain the trust of the deceased. The first suspect was Han Xinqian, her boss, who always made her life difficult. The second could be a fat, unpleasant man who had thrown some of May's belongings in the trash. And lastly, there was that one guy she trusted the most and had opened up to about her feelings. But this information didn't impress the demon. It simply wasn't enough. Moreover, he leaned in so suddenly that it startled her. In reality, he understood that she was constantly thinking about him in the video of his presence, and she was the one drawing him closer. But it seemed the demon agreed with her about Luo Xingnan, because one could never trust men, especially attractive ones. He also noticed a strange detail in the main character's behavior that caught his attention. The fact was, she was very easy to scare, and anyone could take advantage of that. He believed she was worthy of being one of his people and wanted her to start working for him. Her goal was very noble, and he liked how devoted she was, willing to sacrifice her own life for her deceased friend. When he leaned in again, he kissed her. Inside her, everything ignited, and she felt a strong heat. Suddenly, everyone woke up, and even the detective could tell where the boy he was supposed to protect had gone. After the demon kissed the girl, he noticed that her appearance had changed. She was so flustered that she couldn't say a word. Bai Jiho kissed her, knowing she hadn't appreciated his bite on her neck, thinking this would please her much more. But it only made her angrier. After a while, the demon and the main character descended to the floor where it all began. The boy saw how flustered the girl was and ordered her to stay by his side, not to stray even a step away. Meanwhile, Qianxia, observing the crowd's reaction, couldn't understand why they adored him so much when he was just an ordinary demon. As he moved, the crowd cheered him on with applause and shouts. Additionally, the girl next to him caught their attention, and conversations about her began immediately. Many recognized her and realized she was their colleague from the company. They also recalled that she was the best friend of the deceased and probably knew how to charm handsome men. The demon, sensing the thoughts and conversations of the people, wondered how the girl could have tarnished her reputation and the opinions others had of her. So, all the surrounding thoughts were solely about her and how she managed to gain his trust. In reality, Qianxia was completely indifferent to the chatter behind her back. She understood that she had very little time left and needed to use it wisely. The boy had a business meeting with a company representative and asked the girl to buy him some candy, which she was planning to do at that moment. So, she approached the vending machine trying to get something for him. But she couldn't believe her eyes when she saw his picture even on the candy wrapper, showcasing the boy's popularity and status. Suddenly, she heard the creak of a door behind her. Turning around, she saw someone watching her through a small window. Seeing the unknown boy, she was extremely frightened. The boy, realizing he had given himself away, started to run. Still, curiosity overcame her fear, and the heroine dashed after him to find out who the suspicious man really was. She tried to shout at him and get him to stop, but he kept running. He was quickly descending the stairs. But the girl was much faster than him, so she easily caught up and grabbed his arm. The fugitive realized he was in a tight spot and that big trouble awaited him. The heroine scrutinized his expression, trying to understand who he really was, as the boy seemed very familiar to her. Suddenly, she recalled a story from her friend's life that was connected to him. After all, he was also an employee in her department and had crossed paths with her quite often. Moreover, she had seen him multiple times and knew he was from the finance department. There was no doubt he knew something about the circumstances of her death. But the boy didn't want to answer, believing that nothing could change now. His words struck Qianxia deeply, and she could no longer hold herself back. In that moment, she lunged at the boy, trying to extract any information he had that could shed light on Mei's death. She was ready to do anything to find out who had taken her photo and spread it among the group of employees, even if it cost her own life. But even after that, the man said nothing, feeling the threat emanating from her and unwilling to share anything. Realizing this, the girl calmed down and let him go. She understood that she shouldn't have resorted to such extreme measures since she had the demon's support. And in any case, the criminals would have to face justice. The boy was relieved when she released him. Now, she calmly repeated her question, wanting him to share everything, even if he thought it wasn't that important. According to him, it all started 3 years ago when Mei had just begun working at the company. He had liked her right away, and he had no hope that she would ever date him, so he had no choice but to watch her from afar all those years. He felt very upset when, after a while, Luo Xingnan appeared and managed to capture her attention, even winning her over. It seemed the girl was happy with him, but he never truly loved her and eventually broke her heart. He thought at first it was due to a lack of mutual feelings between them, but later realized there was another reason. She had a huge fight with her colleagues on her floor and was forced to go to the restroom on the floor below, which was something very unusual and strange. After all the events that happened in Mei's life, she suddenly decided to end her life, which was very odd. The heroine realized that the secret might be hidden in the restroom on the 12th floor, where she didn't want to go alone and had discouraged her colleagues from going there. Meanwhile, a meeting began in the large hall, attended by many influential representatives of the company. They were discussing the future of their business and trying to draft a detailed plan, but the boy was completely uninterested in their chatter. He couldn't stop thinking about Qianxia and how unusual her personality was. Suddenly, he felt her presence nearby. And indeed, he saw her next to his bodyguard. He witnessed their conversation and tried to understand what was really happening. So, he began to listen closely. As it turned out, the girl just wanted to give him the candy she had bought from the vending machine. She also mentioned that she had urgent business on the 12th floor and wanted to head there at that moment, having to skip an important meeting. The bodyguard listened to her and agreed to do everything as she requested. The boy was openly displeased that the girl was talking to his bodyguard. So, trying to intervene, he used his own power to force the bodyguard to silence. Suddenly, the man fell silent. He felt an incredible pain throughout his body. The bodyguard didn't understand what was happening and what could be causing it. But Qianxia, seeing the boy, realized it was because of him. She understood that he was just jealous of her talking to the bodyguard and didn't like that she was conversing with him. So she walked away and disappeared from his sight so that the man wouldn't suffer from the pain inflicted by the demon anymore. Bai Jiho even found her on social media and sent her a message. However, she ignored him there too. She simply read the message and didn't reply. The men involved in the meeting tried to get his attention, but he was so fixated on her that he didn't even hear their words or react. He was waiting for Qianxia to respond to him, and it seemed that was far more important to him than the fate of the company. Everyone in the room was looking at him, not understanding why he wasn't answering questions or participating in the discussion. Due to his behavior, the speaker felt awkward, thinking he had said something wrong. After a while, Bai Jiho managed to gather his thoughts. He was tired of the long conversations and expressed his desire to end the meeting. However, the men intended to cooperate with him and were ready to meet any of his conditions just to get the star to agree to collaborate. At that moment, he stated his conditions, wanting Qianxia to leave her department and become his assistant. However, his colleagues knew her and were convinced that she had no experience whatsoever. They wanted to find him someone much better and more experienced. Moreover, they considered her a novice, despite the fact that she had been working at the company for 3 years. But Bai Jiho only wanted her, and without her, he didn't want to sign the contract. Meanwhile, Qianxia managed to reach the 12th floor. Finding the same restroom, she checked to see if anyone was following her before entering. Once she was sure of her safety, she stepped inside. At first glance, she found nothing suspicious at all, and she couldn't understand what her friend had been running away from all this time. She also checked the room that was accessible only to women, but found nothing there either. Additionally, she thought her friend might have only been afraid of a hidden camera. So she began searching for it. Qianxia checked all the places where it could have been installed. She even checked the toilet paper dispenser, hoping to find something. But everything was in vain and she saw nothing suspicious. Suddenly, she realized there was one more stall she hadn't checked. Furthermore, she heard someone approaching her and quickly said goodbye to the bodyguard to avoid drawing attention. The girls who entered the restroom were annoyed by the constant repairs and decided to go down to the floor below to avoid waiting. Qianxia asked them if anyone had recently repaired the restroom doors, as she wanted to get on the trail of the criminal. As it turned out, unknown people with a set of tools had come to the restroom the previous evening. This happened right after May's death. The girl realized that all these events were very suspicious and thanked them for the valuable information. Because she had come to a conclusion that this could have happened just before the demon appeared. The heroine tried to find him, but he was nowhere to be seen. The only thing she saw was a pile of notifications on her phone from the boy. He wrote that he didn't plan to show up in front of her at every opportunity anymore. And for him to appear, she needed to call him Master Demon. That evening, the workday came to an end. The heroine stood by the emergency exit. She was supposed to meet the demon and wanted to tell him what she had managed to find. Suddenly, she saw him approaching her. This could mean that the person might come back to insert the memory card and continue recording the video. Moreover, it was clear that this was the work of a real creep since the camera was set up right in the women's restroom. However, Qianxia was convinced that it was too late to start searching, because if there had been a need, they would have replaced the memory card immediately, leaving the camera empty. Therefore, it could be concluded that someone else had found the camera and removed the flash drive with the recorded information. Just then, the girl heard someone approaching and quickly said goodbye to the guard to avoid drawing attention to herself. The girls who had come into the restroom were annoyed by the constant repairs and decided to head down to the floor below to avoid waiting. Qianxia asked them if anyone had recently worked on the restroom doors, as she wanted to get closer to tracking down the culprit. As it turned out, unknown people had come to the restroom with a set of tools the night before. This happened right after May's death. The girl realized that all these events were very suspicious and thanked them for the valuable information, because she had come to a conclusion that this could have happened just before the demon appeared. The heroine tried to find him, but he was nowhere to be found. The only thing she saw was a bunch of notifications on her phone from the guy. He wrote that he didn't plan to show up in front of her at every opportunity anymore. And for him to appear, she needed to call him her demon master. That evening, the workday had come to an end. The heroine stood by the emergency exit. She was supposed to meet the demon and wanted to tell him what she had managed to find out. Suddenly, she saw him starting to approach her. He was running a bit late since they had agreed to meet much earlier and she had to wait for him. Still, she let him in. The demon knew what she was thinking and what she wanted to talk about, but he couldn't understand why the girl was acting so strangely. Suddenly, she turned to him. Qianxia looked at him seductively, wanting him to tell her what was wrong with her. She smiled at him, calling him her master. A silence fell between them. The demon was very confused and didn't know how to react to such behavior. All the demon wanted at that moment was to bite her to death. But the girl ignored him and simply went to the bathroom, leading him along. Bai Jiho had no idea why she had brought him to the bathroom. He was so happy that he forgot about the camera and that she suspected him. Suddenly, she showed him the camera. Qianxia wasn't sure if that was the cause of her friend's death, but she was convinced it could be related. Moreover, she pointed out significant damage to the body and that there was no memory card inside. It was unclear who owned the camera and the demon needed to find out. After all, that person could provide answers to all the questions and might be involved in spreading May's photos. But the demon didn't understand how he would manage to find the culprit since they had no evidence besides the broken camera. Then, Qianxia pulled out her main weapon. She was convinced that the demon wouldn't be able to resist the candies he loved so much. So he had no choice but to agree to help her. Qianxia wanted him to relive the events of the past and see what happened with the camera and who had taken out the flash drive. But for that she needed to get a lot more candy to pay him back in some other way. Then Qianxia pulled down her shirt, exposing her collarbone. She promised him much more after he helped her. The demon couldn't resist her, so he had to agree to her terms. Suddenly, the demon began to transform. Flames ignited in his eyes. Qianxia couldn't believe how easily he could shift from one form to another. Bai Jiho wanted her to see his hidden camera. After all, he was going to fulfill her request in exchange for her body. The sky over the city changed. The moon turned red, a true blood color. And only one person in the whole world knew what was really happening. He calmly sat in his apartment, observing everything. He knew it was the work of the devil, and he had descended to earth once again. Or maybe it wasn't a person at all, as the wine glass in his hand floated. Meanwhile, everything was ready and the events shifted to the past. It was an ordinary morning at the company and most employees were working at their desks when suddenly a conference was announced. Everyone headed to the hall where it was supposed to take place. Suddenly, one of the employees became very frightened. She felt as if something had touched her body. But it was the demon who had accidentally brushed against her with his wing. He scared the woman so much that she didn't even want to go to the meeting, convinced she had seen a person with wings. Still, the demon understood that this way he would easily reveal himself, so he needed to transform into an ordinary person. After all, without wings and horns, it was much more convenient and he didn't attract attention. Soon, the conference was about to start and it was the perfect opportunity to sneak into the bathroom and check everything. Moreover, these were the last moments of the girl's life as she would die in a few minutes. She was still alive and was about to head to the bathroom to wash her hands. That day, her colleagues noticed that she looked quite troubled and was acting unusually. In reality, the demon was invisible and didn't have to worry about being noticed. He observed May and compared her to a heroine, concluding who was more attractive. He stopped in front of her and wanted to prevent her from passing. He informed her that Qianxia would be very upset about her death. But she just walked past him, not even hearing or suspecting that the demon himself could be watching her. After all, it was known that even the demon couldn't stop someone who had decided to die. He saw the girl start to climb the stairs. It was clear she was heading straight to the roof when suddenly someone called out to her. It was Han Xinqian who warned the girl that she should stick with her during the interview and not wander off. But Bai Jiho didn't know who that woman was. Yet he noticed she was acting very suspiciously. Moreover, the girl didn't want to listen to her and refused her offer. She looked very tired, so the director let her go and allowed her to rest. May continued on and kept climbing the stairs. Suddenly, she stopped again and turned to her boss. The guy standing between them at that moment was completely confused, trying to figure out what was happening. May was talking about some unknown people that her boss should definitely know. These words struck like thunder as the demon was very surprised, trying to decipher her thoughts. The director seemed to understand what she was talking about but tried to pretend she knew nothing. After all, if she hadn't hidden secrets from everyone else and had helped May from the start, the girl wouldn't have taken such a radical step and everything could have been changed. She could have found the strength to continue living and fighting. Han Xinqian became very nervous at her words. She tried to justify herself, but the girl accused her of nothing. She had long made her choice to leave her life and promised to remember her as a good person and a great leader. May's words deeply pierced the woman's heart. After all, she was the accomplice and was involved in spreading her photos. The girl didn't even notice when her boss returned from the bathroom holding a flash drive with hidden recordings. The director was flustered as she realized where the girl was actually going and what she intended to do with herself. There was no turning back, so she needed to come up with something urgently. Because when the investigation into her death began, Han Xinqian would definitely be interrogated and could be linked to the recordings. So she threw the flash drive into the gap between the stairs where any employee of her company could find it. The demon understood that people were much worse than their demons as they could do very bad things. He watched the clock, knowing that very soon the girl could die. Meanwhile, the boss stood by the window, watching what was about to happen very soon. Suddenly, terrified voices and cries for help echoed outside. Everyone was talking about a girl who had taken her own life by jumping off the roof of a high-rise building. The director began to tremble with fear, realizing that the person she had spoken to just minutes ago was dead. The demon saw chaos erupt inside the building as people rushed out of their offices onto the street. But suddenly, in the crowd, his attention was caught by a very strange man talking on the phone. As it turned out, the unknown person was reporting the girl's disappearance, indicating that he might have been following her. Meanwhile, the main heroine was already waiting for the demon, realizing he was delayed. She imagined various scenarios and could already believe that something had happened to him. Moreover, she couldn't shake off a strange feeling. After all, she constantly thought someone was watching her. And turning around, she saw that the demon could soon be standing right in front of her, and she attributed her strange feeling to exhaustion. When the guy appeared, he could barely stand. The girl had to catch him so he wouldn't fall to the ground. This scared her a lot as she didn't understand what terrible thing could have happened to the demon himself. He replied that he urgently needed to eat something sweet because his head was spinning and he had spent too much energy. The heroine understood he might be doing this on purpose but decided to stay by his side for a while longer. She also noticed that the demon was very cold. But the temperature of demons shouldn't be the same as that of humans, and for him it was normal. To avoid being noticed, they decided to go somewhere else to talk about it, leaving their guard at the entrance. They chose to have lunch at a nearby cafe. The guy ate nothing but sugar and sweets while the girl tried to get him to eat normal human food. However, he had a terrible allergy to it and the food could turn him into a horrific and bloodthirsty demon. Also, the demon no longer wanted the girl to call him her master as it now irritated him greatly. Qianxia found it strange that he ate so much sugar. But for him, it was the best source of energy that helped him recover faster from the time travel. As it turned out, all these manipulations with time were very exhausting for the demon. If he didn't stop in time, he risked getting stuck in the past forever and never returning. He was also trying to hint that he needed to be watched and the girl should have done that for him. He thought it might scare her a little, as she began to realize that this was something to be very cautious about. Also, she couldn't wait to talk about what he had managed to figure out. And he told her everything from the very beginning, every detail. Qianxia had many questions. She didn't understand how the director and all the unknown people he mentioned could be involved in her death. But there was no doubt that her director was the main figure in the story of her death and she needed to be made to talk. The main heroine promised to take care of that and wanted to try to gain her trust or extract some information about her friend. However, the demon was very tired and wanted to postpone everything to another day, as he didn't have the strength to travel through time again. The girl also felt very exhausted, so she headed home. Once inside, she sighed with relief, finally able to relax. She had no idea what would happen next, because when she entered the bathroom, she noticed that the faucet was running, and that meant someone was in the house. Suddenly, she froze. Behind her, behind the shower curtain, stood an unknown man. But the girl tried to keep herself together. She was terrified and her whole body was shaking. The heroine turned on the water. While it flowed, she had a little time to think about what to do next. Then she stepped out of the bathroom into the kitchen, trying not to show how scared she was. She realized she needed to act very carefully and to have some evidence. She turned on the recorder. Then she simulated a phone conversation, trying to convince the intruder in her apartment that she urgently needed to go outside. She hoped that this way she could escape her own apartment. But as soon as she was about to go down and open the door to the stairwell, she heard the intruder start to pursue her. He slammed the door right in front of her face. The slightest chance of salvation was forever lost, because the masked man stood right behind her. It seemed everything was lost, as the intruder grabbed the girl by her hair and pulled her back. Right to him. With all his might, he threw her to the floor, and her phone fell to the ground, nearly breaking. The phone, which was her only chance to call for help, was far under the couch and she couldn't reach it. Meanwhile, the intruder continued to drag her away further from the entrance. In despair, she tried to call for help, but she realized it was all in vain. The criminal began to cover her mouth, and when she didn't listen to him, he hit her. He kept hitting her until she calmed down, and the blows were so strong that blood appeared on her face. More than anything in the world, she wanted just one thing, for Bai Jiho to appear in her apartment at that moment. He was the only one who could help and save her. Meanwhile, the criminal who had been holding the girl all this time promised to let her go. But there was one condition: she couldn't scream. She agreed, as she could no longer endure the torment and the beatings. And as soon as he let her go, she screamed again very loudly. She was ready to give him everything, money, credit cards, jewelry, everything, just so he wouldn't touch her. But the man was only interested in her. He asked about some girl, and the heroine didn't understand who he was looking for. However, the stranger was certain that she knew who he was talking about, as he was aware that she had also been trying to find her. When she didn't respond, he got angry and lifted her up in front of him. He hit her again and threw her away from him. Then, he called someone and reported what had happened. Everything was under his control despite the fact that he hadn't managed to find anything. The heroine began to tremble again. She didn't know how it would all end. But then, the worst happened. The criminal took a photo of her best friend, and he approached her. He advised her not to get involved in her dead friend's case and not to try to find the culprits, because he promised that she would end up just like her and would be dead. After which, he started hitting her again. He didn't care that she was barely standing and remained conscious. Suddenly, she heard someone banging loudly on her door. And after a while, the guard kicked it in to get inside the house. When he saw the girl lying on the floor in terrible condition, he rushed to her and tried to help. Despite her head spinning, she managed to explain what had really happened. The guard had come because the demon had a very bad feeling, but he was too late. The thug had already escaped. Suddenly, the girl remembered her phone. It was still recording on the voice recorder. She had the most important thing, a 20-minute recording, and his voice was clearly captured. Just 15 minutes later, the police arrived at her house. They offered her a place to stay and promised to find the criminal who attacked her very soon. Seeing the photo of her friend, the officer suggested taking her to see her. But he didn't even realize what a terrible mistake he made by reminding her of her dead friend. At that moment, he called his boss, Bai Jiho. And when the guy heard what had happened to the girl, he ordered her to be brought to his house immediately. And she agreed. His house was very beautiful. It had everything, paintings of himself, fountains, exquisite furniture. The guy was very nervous about how long the girl had been gone. Moreover, he didn't know how seriously she was injured, as the scars on her face could be a problem. And he was frustrated that she hadn't texted him. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. He rushed to them and opened the door to see a frightened Xianxia. He immediately began to examine her and promised to take revenge on all her tormentors once he regained his strength. However, she assured him that she was fine. She continued to stand in the doorway of the house, and the guy invited her inside. But the guard stayed outside and the new one came inside the house, as he was supposed to protect it around the clock. The girl was impressed by the luxury of his house. That evening, she was supposed to sleep in the living room. She shouldn't have been afraid, as there were a huge number of his photos on the wall. However, she was convinced that she should return home. The demon suggested she take a hot bath to relax and calm down a bit. And then she remembered that he could read her thoughts when he was near her. She did as he said, as it was really what she needed. However, the horrifying thoughts wouldn't leave her. She thought about what had happened and tried to figure out the motives of the thief. Could that man have been threatening her friend too? How long had she lived in fear? What had she gone through, and how long could she endure it? However, her thoughts were interrupted by the demon, who asked how she was feeling. After all, she had been in the shower for a long time, without even realizing it. And the guy, having read her thoughts, promised to take revenge on all her tormentors. Then he calmly sat down to watch TV. Suddenly, the main character was looking for him. She came into his room, because she couldn't sleep in her own. Moreover, she was scared. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Also, she couldn't sleep with the lights off and asked him to leave them on. She decided to tell him about the attack, and about how she wished Bai Jiho was there to protect her. She was angry because he was late and didn't come in time. Because just a little longer and she could have died. Her words made Bai Jiho think. He covered her up and wanted her to get some sleep. After all, it could calm her down since she was very frightened. It seemed to work. She fell asleep. To avoid waking her, the guy tried to quietly get up. He was going to go to another room but stopped in front of her. The demon looked at her carefully. She was very strange and at the same time, a strong girl. Moreover, she wasn't afraid of him at all, despite the fact that he was a demon. After all, in a little while, she would have to give him her own life. In the face of death, many people tried to break their contracts and fool him. They were willing to pay any price to stay alive. This happened constantly. For thousands of years, people tried to escape death. But no matter what, the ending was always the same for everyone. The demon was just doing his job and people found him themselves. It was very interesting how the girl would meet her own death. In her dream, the girl heard someone calling her. However, she couldn't move at all. The scariest part was that she couldn't feel her own body. But she understood everything and felt herself being pulled in. Thousands of hands were holding her, but she heard her friend's voice calling for help. This made her put in all her effort to rise. And she tried to break free to find her friend and save her. This time, even in her dreams, she had to save her. But she couldn't. May was leaving her again. Suddenly, she woke up drenched in cold sweat. She didn't immediately understand where she was and how she got there. But she couldn't shake off the nightmare she had just experienced. And it took her some time to collect herself. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to the demon sitting in front of her. His horns and ears had grown back, which indicated that he had used his magic again. However, he didn't react to her, and the girl realized that he was asleep and had stayed to guard her. She thanked him and wanted to treat him to some sweets. But she realized that he was sleeping. She needed to be very careful not to wake him. She covered him up. It was very strange that he was a demon and she, an ordinary person, wasn't afraid of him at all. As she looked around his house, she was amazed. There was so much modern technology. It was odd that a demon who had lived for so many years had furnished his house with new tech. She hoped to find many relics from the past in the house. Suddenly, a strange book caught her attention. This book was a photo album and she couldn't wait to look through its pages. It depicted the demon in his past lives. All the people were very famous and influential figures. Moreover, it became clear that the demon could transform himself into a woman. She also saw him in the body of a small child and it was very cute. However, one intriguing detail wouldn't leave her mind. Because in all the photos, he was depicted alone and didn't have a partner. Suddenly, the demon woke up and noticed that the girl was no longer sleeping and was looking through his album. He could change his appearance and she had one question for him. She was curious if he was the only demon in the world. But the guy got very angry at her. He didn't like that she was touching his personal belongings without permission. The girl, to fix the situation, planned to treat him to sweets. For this, she took him to the pastry shop where she worked and could go into the kitchen to prepare any sweets he wanted. However, suddenly, she realized the pastry shop in the demon's house wasn't a coincidence. Because, as it turned out, it belonged to him. And this made her even happier. Bai Jiho was very rich, as he owned several businesses in the city. That same evening, his pastry shop was bustling with activity. The guy acted as if he had never been in a pastry shop before. He didn't even know what was happening at his own business and the girl had to explain it to him. She considered him her special guest and wanted to serve him in a special way. So, she playfully winked at him. He was a special client for her. But the guy was so hungry that he started to stare at her. He was waiting for her to feed him. Bai Jiho asked if she regretted giving up her life for revenge. But the girl didn't regret giving her life to the demon. She also had a question for him. She was only interested in one thing: would she be able to meet her friend after death? After a long pause, the demon said it was possible. But he lied. Bai Jiho was full. The girl had fed him the best desserts she could prepare. He liked them so much that he asked her to make them again. But that day she was busy as May's funeral was to take place. The demon wanted to go with her. But after a while, the guard was already holding him back, not letting him go with the girl. He was worried that someone might attack her again and wanted to be nearby to protect her. He almost managed to convince his guard and the guard was ready to let him go. But the girl wasn't listening to him and didn't want him to go with her. So she simply said goodbye to him. And she was set to head to the funeral. But before saying goodbye, she spoke with his bodyguard. She handed him some sweets for Bai Jiho, which he could eat again when he got tired. But the demon, who had been watching all of this, began to fume. Those sweets belonged to him. Yet, no matter how much she wished he would come with her, she could only be there alone. Meanwhile, people had already started to gather in the funeral hall. The girl was there too. Sitting inside was one person. May's mother. The old woman had long been able to foresee her daughter's death. After all, she understood better than anyone that something was seriously wrong with her daughter. Seeing the heroine, she was overjoyed and called her over. Qianxia saw how hard it was for the old woman and rushed to her feet. She begged for forgiveness, believing herself to be responsible for her death and for not being able to save her. But Grandma didn't know the real reason for her death. They hadn't told her due to her weak heart. She simply wouldn't have survived if she found out that her daughter had taken her own life. The woman had already begun to accept that she was alone. She tried to comfort the heroine. After all, she insisted that they couldn't keep crying as it was impossible to change anything now. Xianxia felt ashamed of her tears, realizing how the grandmother felt and that it was much harder for her. Suddenly, other people entered the hall, among them was director Han Xinxian. She brought flowers to the girl's grave. It seemed she was mourning too, but the heroine immediately sensed something strange about her behavior. Then, Han Xinxian approached Grandma and expressed her condolences, offering her money, which the woman refused. Just then, the main character interrupted their conversation. She wanted to talk to her, so they stepped outside. Han Xinxian was calm until a certain point. The heroine knew about the memory card from the camera and that it was with the director. After those words, Han Xinxian realized just how deep in trouble she really was. After all, she didn't understand how the girl could know about it. At that moment, she pretended to know nothing. Qianxia showed her the wound, explained about the camera, and how she had been attacked in the middle of the night. She didn't believe the director's words and tried to convince her to hand over the flash drive as the same could happen to her. Qianxia just wanted to know the truth and find those responsible. After all, she had a very noble goal. She didn't want anyone else to end up in her friend's place. She couldn't bear the thought of other girls suffering at the hands of predators. However, Han Xinxian wouldn't listen to her. She simply turned and walked away, leaving her alone. Qianxia tried to stop her, knowing the woman definitely knew something. But again, she didn't respond. It didn't matter to her. After the meeting, there were still many questions that needed answers. Along with the director, the girl's colleagues came to the funeral. They talked about May and how wonderful a person she was. For them, her death was also a complete shock. Moreover, they were witnesses to those photos and were discussing all the details that were in the pictures at that moment. They also couldn't understand why she had decided to take her own life. They were convinced that if her mother found out the real reason for her daughter's death, she would go mad. After that, she simply wouldn't be able to live peacefully. They continued discussing the girl's death and the details of the photos. They didn't even notice that her mother was right next to them. She overheard their conversation and couldn't believe her ears and everything they were saying about her child. But it was clear that her girl's death was no accident. The men realized they had said way too much and tried to calm her down, insisting it was all just rumors. However, it was already too late to try to fix anything. And the men felt very ashamed that it was because of them that Grandma learned the truth. The grief-stricken woman began to tremble. She threw herself at May's grave. Falling to her knees before it, she cried uncontrollably. Suddenly, the main heroine heard her voice. She immediately ran into the funeral hall. Seeing the woman lying on the ground, sobbing bitterly, she rushed to her. Meanwhile, Han Xinxian was trying to figure out what had really happened. The grandmother's tears and how she suffered. The main heroine would never be able to forget. After all, that image was very painful for her. Han Xinxian understood what her actions had led to and sent her guys home, deciding to stay herself. Even after some time, Grandma couldn't calm down and collect herself. She didn't get up but continued to sit on the ground with her daughter's photo. Qianxia tried to comfort her, but the woman's grief was much stronger than her words. After all, Grandma understood that she hadn't been able to help her and hadn't seen how much she had suffered. She couldn't even imagine the horrors that could have happened and how terribly she could have been treated. She regretted spending so little time with her and visiting so rarely. She kept crying, and it seemed her heart wouldn't withstand it. Qianxia would never be able to forgive those responsible and promised to find them and make them pay. She decided to take revenge no matter what. All those guilty would face harsh punishment. She sat by Grandma and tried to comfort her. Qianxia understood that sooner or later it would get easier for her. She was able to leave only 2 hours later, once she was sure Grandma was feeling better. But as she was exiting the building, she saw the director waiting for her. It was very strange that she had stayed, but she decided to tell her the whole truth and warned her that it could be very painful. Qianxia promised that she could handle it and was ready to listen. As it turned out, her friend wasn't the only victim. She simply couldn't endure the torment and took such a step. In fact, Han Xinxian was one of the first victims, and she was going to share her story. It all started a long time ago, 7 years ago, when she, as a young student, came to work at the company. Despite her slim chances of getting the job, she was hired and offered a good position. At first, she was full of determination and performed her job perfectly. But later, she realized that the talk of fairness was just a lie. Her work wasn't appreciated properly and the girl felt used. She tried to address the issue with the director, who didn't react at all to her words. Moreover, he even allowed himself to mock her. All her pleas and attempts to explain led nowhere. And each time, she returned empty-handed. Working at the company was very hard, and along the way, she encountered many problems and troubles. Her colleagues wouldn't leave her alone. She worked very hard, trying to achieve her goal and gain respect in the company. Eventually, her problems boiled over one day. She began to drown in the injustice of her own life. Because she didn't want to be like everyone else, she suffered greatly. She didn't want to please anyone and listened only to her inner voice, which played a cruel joke on her, because she could no longer fight. And at that moment, when hope was gone, she made a choice. She trusted one person,